nirasya sarva sandeham akikritti sudarshanam prakashita rahasyam tam bhajami gurumishwaram itam Śrī Radhika-prāṇa-nātha-pāda sarojayo yena premanubhutyasya dattam tam Shri Gurum bhaje. Shri Govinda Pararavinda Marupananyabhilashojitan Purna Prema Rasotsavo Jalamano Vritti Prasannananan Shajvad Krishna Katha Mahamrita Payora Shomura Kelato Bande Bhagavatani Mananudabam Murdnani Patyakshito Namah Shri Guru Krishnaya Nirupadi Kripa Krite Ya Shri Chaitanya Rupa Bhut Tanvan Prema Rasam Kalo Jayatam Surato Pangor Mama Mandamate Guti Matsarvasva Parambojo Radha Madana Mohano Adadanastrinam Dantoir Yacheham Puna Puna Srimad Rupa Parambojo Dhyudisyam Janma Janmani Abhirapali Patiputra Kanta Dasyati Balashva Balashvavara Sri Rupa Chintamala Sapti Sangsto Matsvanta Durdanta Haichurastam Raganugami Bhajano Lasamanasanam Shri Radhaya Sahasara Smaratam Brajendhum Shri Rupa Pada Kamala Shrita Chetasame Chittam Satam Marukari Yatu Pada Padme Bhaktirya Nikilartha Varga Jananiya Brahma Sakshat Krite Anandatishaya Prada Vishaya Jat Sukyat Vimuktiryaya Shri Radharamanam Param Vajayugam Yasya Mahanashrayo Yakarya Vraja-loka Gurutara Premnaiva Tasyai Namah Yaram Yanikilaga Shanga Shamani Shrutra Tritim Sangata Yasvadya Rasikai Sukabdi Janani Dhikarya Mukti Spriham Yadhyata Hridaye Vrajendra Tanuja Premamrita Syandini Saji Yad Hari Bhakta Vrinda Mahita Danyeha Padyavali. By the grace of Shri Kali Yuga Pavana, the Svabhajana Vibhajana Prayojana Avatar Prema Purushottam Karuna Mahasagar Shri Gauranga Mahaprabhu and his beloved Parshad, the crest jewel of Gaudiya Vaishnava acaryas, the fulfiller of his heart's desire on this earth, Sri Rupa Gosvami Pad. Again, today we will continue our discussion of Padyavali. And in particular, today we begin a new prakaran, a new section in the text, that on Utkanta. So we finished in our last discussion the prakaran on Sotsukya Prarthana, or prayers full of eagerness, Sotsukya or Utsukya. And now we will hear further set of prayers. This will be the last of this set of prayers that have been going for the last 3 sections on longing. So in particular, in English, we may wonder, eagerness, longing, these are relatively similar words. In Sanskrit also, utsukya, utkanta are not all that different in general connotation. So Rupa Goswami Pad has used these differently with different intended meaning in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and other texts. So we'll look at what specifically he's referring to with these two different words, and then we'll look at some of the initial verses that he offers in this section. So with that, I'll begin from the top of the new file. So we'll come to verse 97 to start. So, next, the compiler begins a section on Bhakta's longing, or utkanta, to attain Sri Bhagavan. The compiler defines longing, or utkanta, as a characteristic of Bhava Bhakti in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So he offers the following definition, saying, Samutkanta nijabhishta labhaya guru lubdata. So the word he actually uses is samutkanta. So there the prefix sam, meaning samyak, can be taken to mean complete or full utkanta. But here we'll take utkanta and samutkanta as equivalent, since our primary purpose in citing the definition is distinguishing what is called longing or utkanta from eagerness or otsukya. So he says, intense covetousness to attain one's desired object is called longing. So guru lubdata. So here I've given it as covetousness. You could also call it desirousness. The word lubdha or lubdata comes from the same root as the Sanskrit word lobe. So some people are acquainted with translating the word lobe as greed, which is suitable in some contexts, but not all contexts, since typically the word greed has a negative connotation in English, whereas in Rupa Goswami's usage of the term, there's nothing negative about having lobe in the context of desire for bhava bhakti or a particular variety of braja bhakti. This is rather praiseworthy to the nth degree in Rupa Goswami's view. So in the view of some, it may create an incongruence to use a word that typically is used in the context of something that's a vice or something that is considered unfavorable, to use a word like greed to render a term when the author's view of the term is something that's not at all a vice, but rather the paragon of virtue. So desirousness, covetousness, or what have you. The word covetousness I went with here because it, a little bit like the word lobha, at least in my experience of the languages, can straddle both sides, if you will. In other words, sometimes the word covetousness can convey a negative sense of someone wanting too much what they ought not want, but it doesn't always, and it can convey also desirousness in a way that's not connoted to be negative, but rather neutral or positive. And similarly, lubdha or lobe shares that ability for application in both contexts. So, regardless, the point here is that when he's using the term utkanta or longing, he's referring to, you could say more simply, an intensity of desire. Whereas in the previous section, otsukya or eagerness, he defined as being unable to tolerate the passage of time. So that would be something like the effect of utkanta. In other words, when do you become unable to tolerate time passing because you really want something, and when you haven't gotten it yet, it feels like the time is passing very slowly. I gave the example from Western culture example of children on the eve of Christmas or just before they're meant to receive gifts for their birthday or things like this. They can sometimes be so anxious and eager for those gifts that it feels like a long time until they finally get them. So that sense of it feeling difficult to pass time is like the effect or a state or an experience that one has as a result of having very intense covetousness or desirousness for something. So in that way, we can recognize a distinction between, quote, longing and eagerness, or utkanta and utsukya. And I also went with the English word longing here because the term utkanta in Sanskrit comes from the word throat. Kanta means the throat. So utkanta would literally mean someone whose throat is up or out. So just as someone who's awaiting for someone to arrive, let's say, might be looking out the window or looking over their shoulder or looking up, in hope of something, the way, sports fans might, when the ball nears the goal or the ball is hit with the bat, then they might croon their neck up to see what happens next. So this, being intensely desirous to see or to receive something that may come. This is, to my understanding, how the word utkanta, or, up-necked or something, conveys this idea of desirousness. So I thought that rendering it as in English as longing might be a little bit true to the etymology of the word. But regardless, we're focused on concepts, and we know that none of these, translations are perfect equivalents. So hopefully it's clear then. This is a section on longing, on the desire that bhaktas feel. So as we've discussed repeatedly in the recent discussion of the 4th verse of the Shikshastakam, the primary symptom of bhava bhakti is tadeka sprihatva, desirousness only of Bhagavan. And then here Rupa Goswami is adding that desirousness of him, one of its characteristics is intense covetousness. So the fundamental characteristic is a singularity of desire for him. And then a further characteristic of that is that it's intensely focused upon him. So, for context, before we look at the verses he cites here in Padyavali on this topic, we'll look at the verse that he cites in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So Sri Rupapad then illustrates this quality of longing with a verse from Krishna Karnamrita, which Sri Vijayabhushan Pad explains in his Sahitya Kumudi, employs a literary ornament of meaning, or artha alankar, known as ullekh, wherein one object is described in a number of different ways, by means of descriptions of the qualities or activities perceptible at various sites within the singular object of description. Thus, all the qualities or activities described by Sri Bimalmangal Thakur in this verse from Krishna Karnamrita are observed as distinct locations within the singular object of Sri Krishna's enchanting figure. The translation has been rendered in a manner that at the expense of idiomatic normality in the English phrasing mirrors to some extent how the parallel construction using the locative case reads in the original Sanskrit, by employing only the preposition amid in all instances of the locative case. So this is perhaps a little bit excessive detail. We're starting to do commentary on the commentary, so to speak, which I've tried to avoid as we go through here, but I thought this was particularly charming, so I thought, why not include it? So what's endearing about the manner that this verse is composed is that Krishna's figure is the subject of description, and then so many of the features that are perceptible within that figure are all described in a manner of parallel description, so to speak, using the locative case. So in English, we would typically not use the same preposition to refer to each of these things, but if you were to if you were to make use of separate distinct prepositions in all these cases, then something of that, the way that the verse is introducing something by saying this is inside this, and this is inside this, and this is inside this, and then at the very end states what that object is, then, so to speak, the pop, if you will, of reading the verse and becoming gradually acquainted with all these elements such that finally it's revealed what this ultimately is, that same effect is a little bit lost. So, as I said, at the expense of it reading nicely, hopefully something of the intended effect of the way that it's composed comes through, which I thought was a worthwhile trade-off in this case. So, the verse is as follows. Again, this is Bilvamangal Thakur, the Krishna Karnamrita, cited in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Anam ram asita bruvor upachitam akshnina pakshang kure shvalulam anuraginor nayanair ardram rido jalpite atam ram adaramrite madakalam amlan vangshi svane shvashaste mamalochanam vrajashishor murtim jagan mohinim. Slightly bowing amid his black brows, abounding amid the flourishing sprouts of his thick eyelashes, flickering amid his impassioned or impassioning eyes, tender amid his gentle smile, bright coppery red amid the nectar of his lips, and delighted amid the bright notes of his flute. My eyes long for that figure of the youth of Braja, enchanting the world. So to say slightly bowing amid his black brows is another way of saying that his brows are slightly arched. And then saying, abounding amid the flourishing sprouts of his thick eyelashes can convey that it's as if he's casting a bright or a glimmering glance from his eyes in a sidelong manner from the midst of these arched brows. But that brightness and that casting of his glance is somehow comparable to fresh sprouts that are, beginning to blossom with flowers in an abundant manner. And then flickering amid his impassioned eyes, so that, movement of his eyes comparable to the quick movements of a bird or a bee, something like this. And again, depending on how you read it, it can mean that his eyes are full of passion and expressive of passion, or that they impassion those upon whom he glances. So tender amid his gentle speech. So in other words, as he's casting this glance from time to time, he's also speaking tender words, and he's speaking them with bright red glossy lips. So the glossiness of his lips, the taste of his lips is compared to nectar, and also bright coppery red in color. And he's also from time to time playing the flute, and as he does so, then he's emitting evident delight. So this sight is so relishable to the eyes of the author that he's saying, my eyes long to see him as he's playing the flute, as he's speaking sweet words, as such nectar is coming in the form of sound, in the form of speech, in the form of sight from his lips, while his eyes are flickering with passion, and his brows, his eyelashes are ornamenting that brightness in his eyes, the movements of his eyes. So this figure of Sri Krishna is enchanting to the entire world. So feeling so enchanted, he longs to behold him. So interestingly, if we think about this citation, Rupa Goswami is citing this to show longing, but the verse itself actually doesn't say much about the characteristic of longing. It speaks more about the object that inspires the longing. So, perhaps shows the extent of longing that the compiler feels for this Brajendra Nandan Sri Krishna, to consider that just describing all of the features of Sri Krishna that inspire intense longing is sufficient to convey what is longing. Something like this. Although, at one point that we could also add, that I recall perhaps Sanatana Pad or Sri Jiva Pad making in regard to one of the first descriptions of the Vraja-gopis in the Bhagavatam, one of the first in the 10th canto, where it describes their observance of Krishna's return in the late afternoon or the early evening from the forest. There it describes how they behold him, but the way that it is phrased is it says that the eyes of the gopis were desirous of beholding him. And again, one of the commentators, perhaps Sanatana Pad or Sri Jiva Goswami Pad, one of the two puts it that Shukadev chose to not say that the gopis were desirous of seeing Krishna, but rather that their eyes were desirous of beholding Krishna, to convey that the desire was so intense that it wasn't merely intellectual, or it wasn't merely that they thought or felt the presence of the desire in their mind, but that the desire was so strong it was as if their eyes or their other parts of their body were already putting this desire into action because of its intensity. In other words, when a desire is extremely intense, it can even bypass one's intellective faculty to regulate one's behavior. So to convey that description of the eyes having this longing can be understood to convey an intensity of desire that overrides, or that happens even faster, so to speak, than a cognitive, reflective emergence of desire within one's thought process. So in that way, we could say that simply this, quote, "my eyes long, ashaste mamalochanam," does convey samutkanta, or intense covetousness. In any case, this is how he introduces the subject in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we'll look at verses he cites here in Padyavali on this topic. So, ata tesham utkanta, now their longing, and of course there here means Bhaktas. So he starts with another verse of Raghupati Upādhyāya. We've already had some excellent expressions from him so far, and today we get more. So the verses we have today both come from Raghupati Upādhyāya, who, again, as we discussed earlier, what is known to have been a disciple of Madhavendra Puripad, and someone whom Sriman Mahaprabhu met with in Araila, or this village near Varanasi, and had a very endearing meeting, which we'll come to in a minute. So śrutayaḥ palāla-kalpāḥ kimiha vayaṁ sāmprataṁ cinumaḥ ahriyata puraiva nayanair ābhīrībhiḥ paraṁ. The Śrutis are like straw. What can we gain from them now? Long ago, Parabrahman was whisked away by the eyes of the ābhīrīs. The Śrutis are like straw. What can we gain from them now? Long ago, Parabrahman was whisked away by the eyes of the ābhīrīs. The author compares the Śrutis to straw in this verse, to imply that they are like stalks devoid of grain, and thereby suggests that the object one seeks to attain by studying them is not available within them, just as someone who threshes rice stalks to obtain grains cannot obtain any grain from stalks that have already been threshed. Thus, he asks rhetorically, what can we gain from them now? He then explains why the Śrutis are such. Long ago, Parabrahman was whisked away. The implication being that Parabrahman is the object the Śrutis reveal, the object sought by studying them. And Parabrahman has been as though removed from the Śrutis in a manner akin to how grain is removed from stalks. And by what means has that happened? By the eyes of the ābhīrīs. That is, by the prema of the gopis, expressed through their sidelong glances. The implication being that the gopis' prema expressed through their glances and other gestures, along with their words and actions, attracts Parabrahman, meaning Bhagavan Sri Krishna, away from all else, such that he remains blissfully captivated by the gopis' prema to a superlative extent. And thus one can attain him in full not by means of the upasana taught in the Śrutis, but only by means of taking shelter in the gopis, taking up the path of upasana focused on the attainment of their bhava, and ultimately receiving and worshipping Bhagavan Sri Krishna with their superlative bhava by their grace. This manner of upasana is the ultimate form of the upasana taught by the compiler in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and Ujjal Nilamani. And in the technical terms thereof, is known as Kamanuga Raganuga Bhakti. This specific form of Raganuga Bhakti is also the specific type of upasana that Sri Ramananda Rai lastly explains to Sriman Mahaprabhu during their celebrated conversation on the bank of the Godavari. Krishna praptyarupāya bahuvida hoy, Krishna praptyaratharatamya bahuta achay, kintu jarje bhav se sarvotam, tatasta hoya bicharile ache taratam. Purva rasera guna pare hoy, dvitin ganane pancha parjanta borai, gunadikye svadadikya bhare pratirase, shantadasya sakya vatsalyara guna madurete vaise, akashadira gunajeno parabhute, dvitin krame bhare pancha pritivite, paripurna Krishna prapti e prema hoite, e premera bosha Krishna kohe bhagavate. There are many types of means to attain Krishna, and there is a large gradation in attainment of Krishna. But the bhava which is one's own is felt to be the best of all by everyone individually. Still, if we examine them impartially, however, there is gradation among these bhavas in terms of the degree to which one attains Krishna by way of them. The qualities of the earlier rasas are present in the later ones. They increase from 2 to 3 and count up to 5. In accord with the superiority in qualities in each successive rasa, a superiority in taste also increases in each successive rasa. The qualities of Shanta, Dasya, Sakya, and Vatsalya are all present in Madhura. Similarly, the qualities of space and so on are present in each of the successive elements. they increase from 2 to 3 and gradually up to 5 in earth. Complete attainment of Krishna comes about because of this prema, that is the Madhura prema of the gopis. The Bhagavat says Krishna is captivated by this prem to the greatest extent. Elsewhere in Chaitanya Charitamrita, it is explained that this ultimate captivation of Krishna by the gopis is so great that even chastisement from them is more pleasing to hear for him than the hymns sung in his praise in the Vedas, that is, in the Śrutis aforesaid to be, quote, devoid of grain. So, here in the Charitamrita, it's also said, Priya jari man kori korai bardsan, Vedastuti hoite hare se moraman. If a beloved, meaning a gopi, expresses jealous anger, chastises me, if a beloved expressing jealous anger chastises me, that takes away my mind from the hymns of the Vedas. So spoken in first person, Krishna himself saying this. So this is, I'm giving this context to show, Raghupati Upādhyāya is Raghupati Upādhyāya is saying that Krishna has been, so to speak, taken away from the Vedas. So here you have an expression of he himself in first person saying that even the chastisement of the gopis takes my mind away from the Vedas. So an affirmation of this, and from another side. And from a text titled the Gopi Premamrita, we also find a similar statement to this effect. It says, Na tata ruchate Veda, puranadhyas tate tara, yatha tasan tu gopinam, bhartsanam garvitam vacha. Neither the Vedas, nor other Shastras like the Puranas, are so pleasing to Bhagavan as the chastisement and proud speech of those gopis. The compiler cites in his Lagu Bhagavatamrita a passage from Brihad Vamana Puran, wherein Brahmadev, the source of all the Śrutis himself, offers a personal account of the greatness of the gopis to Bhrigu and other sages. So, Shashti Varsha Sahasrani Maya Taptam Tapa Pura Nanda Gopa Brajastri Nam Padarenu Palabdhaye Tatapina Maya Praptas Tasam Vai Padare Navaha. Austerity was practiced by me for 60,000 years to attain the foot dust of the women of Nanda's cowherd pastures, that is, the gopis. Still, their foot dust was not attained by me. So, the use of the passive voice here is just as per Sanskrit idiom. So, for Raghupati Upādhyāya to say that Krishna has been whisked away by the gopis, you won't find him here in the Śrutis. Now here is the original guru of the Śrutis saying, I did tapasya for 60,000 years, but I couldn't get the foot dust of the gopis. So this is one way of affirming that the worship, the stature of the Śrutis is lesser than that of the gopis. So Brigbadi Vakyam, the reply of Bhrigu and company, the sons of Brahma when they heard this, Vaishnavanam pararajo griyate tvad-vidairapi santite bahavo loke vaishnavanaradadayah tesham vihaya gopinam padarenus tvayapiyat griyate sangshayo me tatrako hetus Tadvada Prabhu. If the foot dust of Vaishnavas is honored even by those like yourself, then there are many Vaishnavas in this world, such as Narada, whose foot dust you could honor. Still, avoiding theirs, the foot dust of the gopis is honored even by you. I have a doubt about this. Please say, O Prabhu, what is the reason for that? So if we have to honor bhaktas to get the grace of Bhagavan, which is a common understanding, then there are many bhaktas. If you couldn't get foot dust from the gopis, then just get some foot dust from some other bhaktas. This is the doubt. In other words, if one considers, the gopis are bhaktas of Bhagavan, there are other bhaktas of Bhagavan, if it's hard to get their foot dust, then get someone else's foot dust. You just need some bhaktas' foot dust, so get it where it's more easily available. Why bother for the gopis' foot dust if even after 60,000 years you couldn't attain it? This is Brigu's doubt. Sri Brahma Vakyam, the reply of Sri Brahma. Nastriyo brajasundaryaha putra shreshta shriyo pitaha naham shivascha sheshascha shrishchatabhir samakvachit. O sons, the beauties of Braja are not women. They are superior even to Shri. Neither I, nor Shiva, nor Shesh, nor Shri are ever equal to them. So by saying they're not women, he means they're not common people of this earth. And not only that, they're even superior to the greatest of the devatas. So to get their foot dust is not the same as just getting any particular bhakta's foot dust. There's some speciality to that. Following the citation of this passage in Laghu Bhagavatamrita, the compiler cites an exchange between Bhagavan Sri Krishna and Arjuna in the Adi Puran that further evidences the paramountcy of the gopis' prema. Trailokye Bhagavad Bhakta Ketam Jananti Marmani Keshuvatam Sadatushta Keshu Prema Tavatulam. So Arjuna asks, which bhaktas of Bhagavan throughout the three worlds know you in truth? With whom are you always pleased? For whom do you have unparalleled prema? Sri Bhagavad Vakyam, the reply of Sri Bhagavan. Na tata me priyatamo brahmarudrascha parthiva na cha lakshmir na chatmacha yatha gopi jano mama. O royal, neither Brahma, nor Rudra, nor Lakshmi, nor myself are so beloved to me as the gopis. Bhaktamamanuraktascha katisanti na bhutale kintu gopi jana prana dika priya tamo mama. How many devoted bhaktas do I have on the surface of the earth? Means, so many. How many bhaktas do I have? So many. The gopis, however, are beloved to me even more so than even my life. And so it goes without saying that they are more dear to me than all my other bhaktas. In this context, that's the sense. So, Namam jananti munayo yoginascha parantapa nacha rudradayo deva yatha gopyo vidanti mam. The sages and yogis do not know me, O tormentor of enemies. Not even Rudra or any of the other devas know me, as the gopis do. Na tapobir na vedaischa, na charayir na cha vidyaya, vashosmi kevalam premna, pramanam tatra gopika. I am not captivated by austerities, by study of the Vedas, by observances of conduct, or by knowledge. Rather, I am captivated only by prema. The gopis are the evidence of this. Man mahatmyam mat saparyam mat shradham man manogatam jananti gopika partha nanye jananti marmani. The gopis know my greatness, my service, my desire, and my intent. O Partha, no one else knows these in truth. Nijangam apiya gopyo mameti samupasate tabhya param name partha nigudha prema bhajanam. O Partha, there are no greater vessels of highly confidential prema for me than the gopis, who care even for their own bodies as my own. That is, they care even for their own bodies, only because they consider them instruments for Krishna's service. So these are statements of Krishna himself, speaking to the superlative position of the gopis, and this is being explained to the sages who feature throughout the Śrutis, and being explained to them by, this statement was made by Krishna to Arjuna, and the previous one was made by Brahma to the sages. So in both of these cases, we see how it is affirmed that attainment of Bhagavan, knowledge of Bhagavan, intimacy with Bhagavan, all of these things are achieved by the gopis, far and beyond what is achieved by any sages or any other persons of any type. Elsewhere, Sri Jiva also cites additional statements from Sri Brihad Puran, wherein the personified Śrutis pray to Sri Bhagavan to become gopis themselves. So again, if we're trying to understand why Raghupati Upādhyāya is saying, "Oh, Krishna's been whisked away, the Śrutis are like empty chaff," then here you have the Śrutis themselves praying to become gopis. So this itself demonstrates that they felt an emptiness in themselves, or a lack within themselves, that it could only be filled by the bhav that the gopis have. So this is something Jiva Gosvami cites in his commentary on Ujjal Nilamani. Kandarpa kuti lavanye tvai drishte mamangsinaha kamani bhava masadhya smarakshubdanya samshayam yatatva lokavin avasinya kamatatvena gopika bhajanti ramanam matva chikirsha jani nastata. The Śrutis say, upon seeing you possessed of the loveliness of a crore of Kandarpas, our minds take on the bhava of a lady love, and are undoubtedly agitated by passion. As the gopikas residing in your abode worship you with the essence of kama, having accepted you as their lover, so too our desire has arisen to do so. Shri Bhagavan Vacha Durlabo Durgatas Chaiva Yushmakam Sumanorataha Mayanumodita Samyak Sopi Bhavitumarhati Agamani Agamini Virinchotu Jate Shrishtyartamudyate Kalpam Saraswatam Prapya Vraja-gopya Bhavishyata Prithvivyam Bharate Kshetre Mature Mama Mandale Vrindavane Bhavishyami Prayanvo Rasamandale Jharadharmena Susneham Sudridham Sarvatodhikam Mayi Samprapya Sarvepi Kritakritya Bhavishyata. Sri Bhagavan says, this excellent desire of you all, is difficult to attain and difficult to accomplish. When approved by me in full, however, it too can come to be. When a future Brahma is born and arises for the purpose of emanation of the universe, you all will arrive in the Sarasvata-kalpa and become gopis in Braja. In the Rasa circle in Vrindavan, within my district of Mathura, in the land of Bharat on earth, I will become the beloved of you all. Attaining in full profound affection for me that is profoundly firm and all-surpassing, you all too will become successful. So, Śrutis becoming gopis. This is of the 4 categories of gopis described. There is a section called Rishi-chara-gopis and Shruti-chara-gopis, or gopis that were former rishis, gopis that were former Śrutis. So these are the various passages that describe them. And also in the Bhagavatam itself, we also find a similar expression, where the Śrutis also affirm in their praises of Sri Bhagavan that they personally don the bhav of the gopis. Nibrittamarun manuksha drida yoga yujo hridiyan munaya upasate tarar arayo pyayayu sam smaranat striya udagendra bhoga bhuja danda vishakta diyo vayaṁ te sama samadrishongri saroja sudha. As a result of remembrance of you, irregardless of their inimical disposition towards you, even your enemies attain nirvishesh Brahman, which sages engaged in steadfast yoga with steady breath, mind, and senses meditate on within the heart. And we too, who are equal to and of equal vision as the women, meaning the gopis, whose minds are firmly fixed on the clubs of your arms, which resemble the hoods of the king of serpents, attain the nectar of your lotus feet. Sri Ramananda Rai cites this statement of the Śrutis later in his aforementioned conversation with Sriman Mahaprabhu as part of his explanation of the means of attainment, or sadhana, of the gopis' prema. So he explains what is meant in this statement of the Śrutis as follows. Se Gopi-bhava-amrite jar lobha hoy, Veda dharma lok tyaji se Krishne bhajai, Raganuga marge tare bhaje je jan, Se jan pai braje brajendra nandan. Brajalokera kono bhav loya je bhaje, Bhav yogya deha paya Krishne pai braje. Tahate drishtanta upanishada shrutigan, Ragamarge bhaje pailo brajendra nandan. Samadrisha shabde kohe se bhave anugati, Sama shabde kohe shrutirad gopi deha prapti. Angripadas masudha kohe Krishna sanghananda, Vidi marge na paye braje Krishna chandra. One who has intense desire, or lobh, for the nectar of this bhava of the gopis, relinquishes Vedic dharma and the world, and worships Krishna. A person who worships him according to the Raganuga path attains the prince of Braja in Braja. One who adopts some bhav of a resident of Braja and worships Krishna attains a body befitting that bhav and attains Krishna in Braja. In this regard, an example is the Upanishad Śrutis. They worshipped according to the path of Raga and attained the prince of Braja. The word, quote, equal vision, or samadrisha, in the aforecited verse of the Bhagavad, refers to following that bhava, the gopis' bhava. And the word, quote, equal, refers to the Śrutis attaining the bodies of gopis. The nectar of your lotus feet refers to attaining the bliss of Krishna's company, as is relished by the gopis. By the path of vidhi, meaning the vidhi marg, one does not attain Krishna Chandra in Braja. So again, we're bringing all this in reference to Raghupati Upādhyāya's statement, Krishna's been whisked away, you won't get him by following the Upanishads, you'll get him by following the gopis. So the implication being that Vidhi-marg varieties of bhajan or following the Jnana-marg, one will never attain Bhagavan in the way that one can by taking up the path of upasana aimed at or focused on Gopi-bhava. One will never attain Bhagavan in the same way. So, collectively, all these statements cited from various shastras by Śrī Rupapad, Śrī Jivapad, and Śrī Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami Pad serve as grounds for understanding the implied meaning conveyed by the author in the verse under discussion. One can attain Parabrahman, that is Bhagavan Śrī Krishna, in full only by means of a form of upasana, the aim of which is the bhava of the gopis, the manner of which is attuned to lead to that attainment specifically, and the result of which is rendering service to Bhagavan Śrī Krishna with Gopi-bhava. Thus, although the literal implication of the verse that one cannot attain Parabrahman at all without taking shelter in the gopis, even if one studies the Śrutis and practices the upasana described therein, has to be considered an instance of hyperbole. It is to be inferred with reference to the aforecited statements and other works, and others in works of the aforecited authors, that a broader sense is the primary one to be taken, meaning it is not attainment of Parabrahman at all, but rather attainment of Parabrahman in full that is being alluded to and longed for by the author in the verse under discussion. So, if you read the verse literally, Krishna's been whisked away by the gopis, therefore you have to follow the gopis, you can't follow what's taught in the Upanishads, therefore no one should do that. So if you read it literally like that, this would lead to the impression that there's no value or no authenticity or no potential for some experience of the Paratattva or Parabrahman by following what's in the Śrutis, by following what's in the Vedas, by following the Jnana-marg. So that would contradict the Shastra itself. That would also be not well received by all the various sampradayas following the path of Gyan. They would describe this as some fanatical sort of remark. So, to preclude that, we have to say that yes, there's some hyperbole going on here, but this is, relishable for Bhaktas insofar as what he means is that the type of attainment of Parabrahman that is aspired for, what from the lens of the Gaudiya Vaishnavas is the ultimate or the fullest attainment of Parabrahman, in other words, the Parabrahman in which there's the greatest experience of rasa therewith, that you can only get in this way. So that ultimacy is spoken of as simply being, the category as a whole. So, for the sake of respecting others, we just want to clarify that we're not taking this hyperbole literally, but we're understanding it to be a relishable expression of fervor, which won't turn us into disrespectful fanatics of others. We'll happily continue to respect those who wish to follow another path, but nevertheless, for those who are charmed by the author's remark and the siddhānta that underlies it, then with great resolve and relish, they will carry on the path given here in reference to everything that's been cited from the Raman and the Sangvad and so forth. So, I might go a few minutes over here. I'm just going to read the last couple paragraphs. Finally, the author's non-mention of Sri Krishna specifically by name, and instead mentioning him as being Parabrahman, carries the import that Sri Krishna is the ultimate self-manifestation of Parabrahman, that is, the Paratattva, and thus is most worthy of being the object of one's upasana, not only as an Ishta Devata for a practice of bhakti aimed at the attainment of moksha, in contrast to other potential Ishta Devatas for a practice of bhakti of such aim, or in contrast to a form of jnana upasana entirely devoid of any Ishta Devata and practice of bhakti at all, as are taken up by various followers of the path of Gyan, but rather as an Ishta Devata on the path of pure bhakti, wherein bhakti to Sri Krishna is conceived to be both the path and the ultimate attainment in and of itself. That the names Parabrahman and Krishna can also be considered synonymous is discussed by Sri Jiva in his commentary on Brahma Samhita. There he cites statements that explain the etymology of the name Krishna, such as the following. So he says, Krishir bhuvachako shabdo nascha nirvritivachakaha tayoraikyam param brahma Krishna ityabhidhiyate. The word Krish is a signifier of existing or being, and the affix na is a signifier of bliss. The oneness of the two, that is, of the reference of Krish and na, that is, of existing and being, namely Parabrahman, is thus referred to as Krishna. So, existence and bliss, Krish, na. So here it's saying that the word Krishna is also a way of speaking of Parabrahman. Sri Jiva goes on to explain in regard to the name Krishna that the root Krish, in addition to being a synonym for existing, bhu, also refers to the action of attracting, akarshana. So this is a more common viewpoint, to think of Krish as attraction or attracting. The interpretation of it meaning bhu or existing is less frequently cited. Whatever the case may be, then employing both of these meanings that the root Krishna can convey as indicators respectfully of Sri Krishna's essential nature and primary quality, he explains that the referent of the name Krishna is bliss, na, who is supremely great most, that is, the absolute all-pervading existent, in his essential nature, and all-attracting, or sarva-karshaka, in his primary quality. The import being that because he is absolute bliss itself and all-pervasive, Krishna is replete with the capability to attract and ultimately satisfy all beings. This is the intended sense when Krishna is spoken of with the term Parabrahman. So, Raghupati Upādhyāya is speaking of Krishna, but using the term Parabrahman on purpose, because typically that's the preferred language of those who follow the teachings of the Śrutis and aspire for realization of the Paratattva in its non-quote savishesh or differentiated form. So to speak of Parabrahman, use the term Parabrahman to refer specifically to Bhagavan and more specifically to Krishna. This is a way of stressing the implication that Krishna is the ultimate manifestation of Parabrahman, of the Paratattva. And also stressing that the essence of following all of the Shastras is the pursuit of Krishna Bhakti, and specifically, Gopi-bhava, seva to Krishna, beyond everything else. So this is how we can view the import of Raghupati Upādhyāya's statement. So I'll just conclude by reading it one more time. He says, the Śrutis are like straw. What can we gain from them now? Long ago, Parabrahman was whisked away by the eyes of the ābhīrīs. So the broader implication being that Prem is the very essence of the highest reality. Bhagavan feels unparalleled Prem for the gopis. They have unparalleled Prem for him. That eternal exchange is the ultimate beatitude. To participate in that, to experience that, is the ultimate fulfillment. And the whole culture that the Shastras enjoin and that they sustain and that they reveal, finds its ultimate fruition or leads to its ultimate apogee therein. So, conveying all these things at once in a concise expression, we have this remark of Raghupati Upādhyāya. So, what's also noteworthy is that he's citing this here in the section on longing. So, there isn't any explicit longing expressed in the verse. In other words, it's saying, what can we gain from the Śrutis? Krishna or Parabrahman has been whisked away by the gopis. So there isn't, as we saw in the earlier example, an instance where the poet himself is saying, I am longing for this, or I'm praying for that, or what have you. So the idea is that just this expression is itself indicative that the author is deeply desirous of Gopi-bhava. This is what can ultimately be drawn from why Raghupati Upādhyāya is writing this, and therefore is reflective of or illustrative of longing, the subject of the section. So I'll conclude there. I went a little over time, pardon me for that. If anyone has any comments, questions, corrections, or anything else on this subject matter, please feel free to share. Yes.
Just a quick question one, and then I have another more important question. The last you read this verse by Raghupati Upādhyāya about Rig Veda. I'm sorry, about Śrutis explaining, like he explained that the Parabrahman was removed by the eye of, and then I understand this word, ābhīrīs or something.
Ahriyata.
Can you recall this?
In this context, the word ahriyata is synonymous with gopi.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay, okay. This makes sense. And also, I would like to, if you don't mind, I would like to just characterize 2 points that came to me as you were glorifying gopis as the only prayojan to obtain the Gopi-bhava. Is that, ontologically speaking, Bhagavan considers Purush, and everything else is Shakti, everything else is Prakriti, right? Can we say that?
Generally speaking. I mean, there are also a variety of his own self-manifestations, which...
Yes, but it's all Prakriti, right? I'm sorry, Purush. Any manifestation of him as expansions of him are Purush in sense of vilas and amshas, but Shakti will be considered as Prakriti, and Jivas are Shakti of Bhagavan. So it seems to be very natural. Prakriti means feminine, submissive. So it's natural to, but upon realizing one's position through bhakti, one's own Prakriti position, meaning naturally the female nature would naturally come into heart. Is it not? Now, question is, what about Gopas and other Nanda Maharaj parents? Sorry, cough. How is their prakriti bhava take place?
Well, I mean, this, so to speak, equivalence or statement of equating prakriti with femininity in an ontological sense, to me is not meant to be taken to its extreme. Or in other words, prakriti is not exactly equivalent to the feminine, although, commonly speaking, Mahaprabhu in the Charitamrita may respectfully refer to women as prakriti, or there may be some, general understanding prakriti and purush as being referent to the two sexes. Nevertheless, when we speak about prakriti in that broad ontological sense as the prakriti, or that which pre-exists the creation, that which is the fundamental, imperceptible, subtle energy from which all manifest things arise, then also practically speaking, the femininity and the masculinity that we're acquainted with from our worldly experience are both products of that prakriti. They're not entirely that prakriti itself. That prakriti is then perceived to be a possessor of certain characteristics that are equivalent or reminiscent of the conventional femininity we perceive in the world. And then we have this notion of prakriti and purush in a similar way. But to me, we don't need to then apply that and then say, well, then how can there be any sort of masculine manifestation from prakriti? I feel like that's sort of where we end up over-applying an intended comparison to the point where it appears to create a contradiction, but it wasn't intended to be applied that far, so to speak. If we look at how it's defined ontologically, and then those who speak of it that way are also speaking of it as the source of both femininity and masculinity, then so to speak, obviously it has the ability to give rise to those things, or contains the subtle means by which those things can come into existence. So, we can just understand that there's a limited scope for application of, gender specificity in that sense. That's how I see it. Does that address your thoughts on this?
Yes. Prakriti, the etymology of prakriti explains it all. However, the conclusion of bhakti sadhana is to absorb oneself in bhava of gopis, but are not, they specifically display feminine, as you mentioned, love lady qualities. So that's like summum bonum for prakriti, I would say, is it not?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's varieties within the prakriti realm. I understand. But would they be meaning that gopis actually represents the essence of prakriti, or they're just, marginal expression of prakriti that only Gaudiya Vaishnavas accept as summum bonum? I mean, and the only entrance into the to obtaining Krishna's grace, Krishna's bhakti.
I suppose you could say like that from a particular perspective that, the gopis, if you call it prakriti or you call it shakti, and the gopis are considered to be the manifestation of the most rarefied form of the most exalted of all the varieties and combinations of the Sarup Shakti and so forth, then yeah, in that sense, you can say like that. And at the same time, you can also maintain a distinction by recognizing that the subtleties and the combinations and flourishing, if you will, of the Sarup Shakti, that is one category, and then the Tatastha Shakti is another category. We typically use the word Prakriti for the Maya Shakti. As I mentioned, one of the common etymologies of the word Prakriti is Prakriti, meaning prior creation. The energy that exists prior to creation. So in that sense, you can speak of all of these things as Shakti or Prakriti collectively, but typically the word Prakriti is in Jiva Goswami's theology is used more specifically for the material energy and not so much for the Jiva Shakti and the Sarup Shakti, etc. I'm not saying that's a complete distinction, but if you think about it, it's a leaning in that way, and the preference is for the word Shakti more so than Prakriti in that case. And of course, the word Shakti also a lot of times carries an equivalence with femininity, which is fine, so to speak, But at the same time, there's definite recognition of a variety of eternal attainments. And as we referred to the Ramananda Sangvad today, whichever one has, one feels to be completely fulfilling and the best of all. So in that sense, that there's no one's going to feel a deficiency if, we say that they achieve an eternal form or an eternal manner of relating to Krishna in a bhav that's characterized primarily by masculinity, and that would be somehow contrary to nature. We'd say no. There's no need to bring that sense of contradiction into that context.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. Thank you very much.
So Bhagavan relishes a variety of rasas, a variety of bhavas, and there are, they all complement the relishability of the other. So we honor them all, and all who aspire to them, all who are steeped in them. And at the same time, some may, following the import of the teachings of Rup Sanatana, Raghunath, Sri Jiva and others, aspire for a particular variety of it, aspire for Gopi-bhava as is ultimately taught here in the Ramananda Sangvad as we quoted tonight, and they can do so, but they don't have to do so believing that that's the one and only way that everyone has to be. It is possible to have deep personal conviction in that and be comfortable and respectful of a plurality of other preferences and approaches and attainments.
And it's interesting, sorry to continue, but interestingly, Rupa Goswami elaborates on 5 rasas actually, elaborately in Bhaktas Sindhu, yet it feels like the Gaudiya Vaishnavas exclusively are aiming at Madhurya rasa, omitting everything else. Just our sadhana, our sadhya is Gopi-bhava, and our sadhana is Manjari sadhana, and everything that leads to Gopi-bhava, as if in contradiction to Rupa Goswami's elaboration on all 5 rasas. I'm just wondering if there's actually I asked one question to Sanatana Babaji, see why there's only a Gopi-bhava these days, but you can see that clearly Rupa Goswami favors all rasas. And I'm just wondering if there's any misunderstanding on my part, or is there tradition fault, or went different direction, or what's going on, basically?
Well, I think it's something that has, so to speak, the demographics have shifted with time. In Gaura Lila itself, nowadays there's a vision where there's been an attempt to kind of force fit this Gopi-bhava onto all the members of Gaura Lila, but you don't get a trace of that in the Chaitanya Bhagavat or the Chaitanya Charitamrita or from what we hear about of other accounts of their Leelas. And many are of the view that, many of the Parshads of Mahaprabhu may have had a primary spirit of Dasyarati, of some of Sakyarati, that there was a plurality, and that Mahaprabhu relished that, appreciated that. Kaviraj Goswami is seen to allude to that by saying, Shrivasadi Jata Mahaprabhur Bhaktagan Nija Nija Bhave Karina Chaitanya Sevan, that Shrivas, all the other Bhaktas, they all worshipped Chaitanya according to their own bhav. So that meant they had plurality of bhavas. Mahaprabhu relished a plurality of bhavas. They all, were in concert with each other, like in a concert. Some people play cello, some people play drums, some people play this, some people play that. It's not that everyone's playing the exact same thing, and there's a way to bring it all into harmony and in a way that makes each one wonderful and relishable. So at the same time, historically, the Goswami's literature has proven to be highly influential. And so how and to what extent in the first, second, third generation of followers coming from Mahaprabhu's Parshads, the views, the texts, the upasana, the specific type of aspiration that the Goswamis cultivated became fused, if you will, into the lineages coming from, associates of Nityananda Prabhu, associates of Advaita Prabhu, associates of the other parikaras. There was, a period of intermingling, if you will. And, from that time, it seems that there was obviously a proliferation of the Goswami's viewpoints and a grasp of the Goswami's personal ultimate interest in Gopi-bhava upasana, which is, universally recognized to be predominant in their texts and, in their personal prayers that you can find in the Stavamala and the Stavavali and other places. So, Shamananda, Srinivas, Narottam, they came, they propagated the Goswami's works among the communities of followers of the other parikaras. They championed much of what the Goswamis, stood for and had. But, this is where it's hard to reconstruct exactly what went on 400 years ago and how exactly all this fit together. There most likely was some adjustment and some intermingling or fusion of elements that were dominant in the Bengal area with elements coming from Braj, and that this created a new thing, so to speak, or a synthesis emerged from popular appreciation that was then passed on in these various lineages, and most likely was never homogeneous, or in other words, most likely was always based on a variety of different emphases and combinations and other things. And, historically we do hear evidence of there having been, Gaudiya Vaishnava sadhakas who were Sakya-ras upasakas. Haridasa Das does mention some of them in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Jivan. So, it's not common, but we do hear of it, that there were Mahatmas even in the late 19th century who were Gaudiya Vaishnavas and who were Sakya upasakas. There are mention of this, although it's not so common. And in the 20th century, it doesn't seem that there's been any prominent Mahatmas who have championed a Sakya specific or another type of upasana, very precisely focused on another type of rati as its aspired for aim. So it may be that in the 20th century there was a further shift or a further, drift, if you will, in the demographics where the prevalence of Madhura Rati focused upasana became prevalent. And no doubt there have come up some, groups or some persons who have advocated for this is the one and only thing that all should pursue. And there are some who have taken up a promotional or a sense of, wanting to, quote, upgrade people who don't get it yet, or, think that they have some kind of, elitist self-assigned justification to enlighten people about how this is the one and only thing that Mahaprabhu gave that everyone has to accept. And, a lot of times they co-opt the Anarpita Charim Chirad Karunaya Vatirna Kalo verse to say that this is about that and only that, But if you read Kaviraj Goswami's interpretation of this verse in the Charitamrita, he doesn't say that. He doesn't say that this verse refers only to Madhura Rati and no other Rati, and he doesn't say it refers only to, Kamanug, what do you call Tad Bhave Chatmika Kamatmika Rati alone and no other. He doesn't give that explanation. And in Chakravarti Pad's, there's a commentary of Chakravarti Pad attributed to the Vidagdha Madhava where this verse is from. Chakravarti Pad doesn't say that in his Tika. So this idea that we have to narrow it down to only this, that tendency may even be something that only became prominent in the 20th century. I don't know for sure. I can't say that. Obviously, I think there's been an understanding, and I would say that I think unarguably what you would, if you were to interpret this verse with what you call mukta pragraha nyaya, or this hermeneutic of, quote, the free rein meaning. In other words, what does something refer to in its ultimate possible sense? A follower of Rupa Goswami who sees his personal emphasis and his ontological system favoring Madhura Rati and ultimately what is popularly called Manjari Bhav, they would say, well, the ultimate mukta pragraha meaning of this refers to that. So, okay, that I don't object to. If someone wants to say that this is the ultimate object that this statement could refer to, okay, but does that mean that it refers to nothing else at the same time, that it's only that one ultimate possible sense? That I don't think we need to do, and I don't think it helps the Sampradaya, and I don't think it accurately represents the way that the verse has been commented on by the early acharyas, to hyper-focus it only on this thing, which, frankly speaking, is an extremely profound, extremely esoteric, extremely difficult, rarefied thing, which, was it Bhagavan's own view or these acharyas' view that most rarefied thing, which in a modern cultural context to explain to someone who doesn't have a theological background can even sound strange or unusual, that alone is the only thing now we're going to champion non-stop above everything. I don't think that that's realistic, and I don't think that was how the Goswamis foresaw their theology being represented to society. If you look at the Bhagavatamrita, if you look at the Hari Bhakti Vilas, you look at the Sandarbhas, there's a broadness to this which was meant to have integration into the broader Sanatana Dharma culture, into the broader Vaishnava culture, and to facilitate mutual respect with other Vaishnava Sampradayas, and certainly mutual respect among followers of Mahaprabhu. So, if someone has a lot of zeal for that particular type of upasana, fine, but they don't necessarily need to adopt an elitist attitude because they have that personal persuasion, or, sort of oversimplify or over narrow, something that was designed to both have a depth for people who are blessed to appreciate that and broader content to accommodate many, to allow for that broadness and that diversity to remain in the fold, so to speak, I believe is also in keeping with what Mahaprabhu, what Bhagavan, what these acharyas would want. And if this, supreme, ultimate, supreme Manjari Bhav is all about following Rupa Goswami, then following Rupa Goswami means also respecting the broader connotation of his words and sticking to what he himself taught and not sort of trying to outdo Rupa Goswami with Rupa Goswami. Like, he wrote these books. He didn't write it down like that. He wrote some of his own confidential prayers, but wrote a broader system as well. So let's preserve that subtlety and that texturedness to his canon and how it's discussed. This is, in my personal view, obviously there are some widely respected, famous persons who've said things slightly different than that, so I don't mean to, argue with that or, anything like that. If other people want to think otherwise, that's also fine, but my conscience and my studying of the texts and what I've heard from sadhus I highly respect, I've come to this understanding, which I feel is integrates well with the broader society, facilitates respect, and facilitates subtle appreciation for what the Goswamis wrote, and also allows for people to pursue that very thing if they're so inclined.
But it seems to be symptomatic for any society that always tends to become like one common denominator for all, and then we have some disagreement, and there's break of the society, and there's one branch stands out of their own understanding, right? Because of this narrowed down common denominator, there will be, branches, sub-branches, and so on and so forth. So I agree with you that the all-comprehensive understanding is, well, truly speaking, if Mahaprabhu come to bring jivas to Goloka, there must be universal, something called, right?
Sorry, what was that? There must be universal something. Oh, looks like the line dropped. All right, well, maybe he'll make it back. If not, we can hear next time. But otherwise, I'll just conclude here for now. Vaishnavebhyo namo nama. Jai Shri Guru, Jai Shri Gaur, Jai Jai, Radhe Shyam.
Jai Jai.